Thank you. So we're going to be looking at the guidance note that we had on the management of wasting in the absence or shortage of supplies, in this case, the specialized nutritious food products. We had shared with you this note and you had read it and you thought you needed some more clarity, and we're going to try and do that. Just to emphasize that probably it didn't appear to be clear to you because it's really more targeted on a managerial aspect or a country level or decisions at country level, but it can certain aspects of it can also be applied at organizational level. So slide.
Yeah.
So just quickly to ask to start us off, what are the supplies you're currently using in your areas of operation? How you've gone about it. So let's go into this discussion. Like I said, it's really more of a guidance note. It doesn't have very concrete examples on how you can go about it, but we'll try to see how we can try and operationalize some of the aspects in there at our level. So there are quite a few things that we need to be clear about as we're trying to, engage in any activities when we do not have the existing supplies. One is this guidance was really made for areas where you've already been using these SNFs, that is a specialized nutritious food. So you already have experience with implementing at treatment and prevention programs with RETF, with RUSF, and F75 and F100 and all those. And you have used they are supposed to be, these guidelines will only work within a specific or defined context. That's why I was asking, what is your definition of absence, or what do we mean by when we say supplies are absent? So working along with the Ministry of Health, the cluster partners, UNICEF, WFP, and all other parties engaged, it's important that it is already defined when should we actually implement the use of these different guidances that we are being given. So you don't just come and say, oh, we don't have supplies for the next 2 days, let's start implementing modification X. We know we don't have RUTF for 1 week. Let's maybe use RUSF, or let's use fortified blended foods, or let's do a different strategy. There has to be a set time. And this is something that has to be agreed at national level. And of course, it comes down to regional level and down to Orida level through communication, that you can only trigger or start applying these preparedness and mitigation measures if maybe you expect supplies breakage for 1 month or 2 months or 3 months, or maybe if the prevalence of malnutrition has shot up by a certain percentage within a specified period, or maybe if you don't have accessibility or whatever it is, it has to be clearly defined. You cannot decide on your own as an organization and say we're just going to do it at once. There has to be proper communication and information within the whole system, from the top to the bottom. All these more changes or advice or information or guidance given that we're going to look at is not meant to replace your existing national guidelines. So now you have the updated guidelines. Now you also have the family mark guidelines. We also have the revised WHO guidelines, but I'm not sure they have already been taken on by Ethiopia. So currently, you must rely on your national guidelines on how to do the work. And you're also not supposed to apply them where the use of SNF is not indicated. However, there have been cases where some countries have wanted to actually start CMAM programs or IMAM programs. And so it will be the first time to start. And so they may have to use those products. So that's okay. But if they have never used them and it's not being established that this is what they want to do, then you're not supposed to apply most of the information in this guidance. And also just to add on that, given the recent, WHO guideline release, there are some things that may now be considered part of what you should do routinely that are in here, yet we consider them as, as something to use when you really have shortage or absence of nutritious supplies, but they're now also incorporated into the updated WHO guidelines, which means they are now going to be eventually when they update the national guidelines for Ethiopia, hopefully at some point, then they'll be part of what you would consider at that point as routine programming. I think these are not key terms anymore, but it's one of the key words you're going to hear me use a lot is the wasting word, which really means it's a combination of moderate and severe acute malnutrition, based on weight for height Z-score and or nutritional edema or and MAC. So now we are slowly, replacing a bit of acute malnutrition with either wasting or severe wasting and nutritional edema. And then the specialized nutritious foods, those I have already mentioned, and I'll continuously call them SNFs because it's easy to use the short form. And this, of course, includes the RUTF, the RUSF, the F75, the F100, and these are really foods that are formulated to provide the specific nutritional needs for the treatment and prevention of wasting as per the WHO guidelines. So I thought I'd share these in advance so that we are clear as why we are continuously saying wasting. Yet we used to think wasting is just, the weight for height aspect. So it's now a combination of that and more. So this guidance note was brought about because we have consistently had issues with continuation of services due to pipeline breaks, whether it is, short term or medium term. And these usually have had negative outcomes on the children who are enrolled in the programs. And there's so many reasons why these pipeline breaks can happen. They could be logistical challenges that, leading to shortage within the country. For example, if there's border closure and supplies cannot be brought in, and border closure does not just mean the country, it could also be within the country. For example, in the case of Ethiopia, we may have, closure of maybe restriction of movement to one region to another. You could have reduced production capacity for the various manufacturers, because I remember at some point we had quite, I think, over 6 or 5 companies producing RUTF in Africa, and then at some point, because of quality issues, they were reduced. So that also can affect production. It could be that they were closed also, maybe the availability of the raw materials was not sufficient. It could also be stock management challenges, and these are faced at all levels, at national level, but even within your health facilities, stock management challenges can contribute to the mismanagement or the poor use of the supplies that you already have in stock, and food safety issues and other aspects. So it was really found that constantly there has been the issue of lack of supplies, others calling it lack of supplies, others calling it shortage, others calling it rupture, or whatever it is. The supplies have not always been consistently available to the end user at all times because of so many reasons at all levels. And of course, when we went into when we had the COVID-19 pandemic, the situation really got worse, and so it was found necessary to bring on a guidance that would help in such situations. Actually, this guidance was really based on the guidance on programming in the context of COVID-19. So that's when we added on this guidance, because then one of the issues, as they were discussing the issue of how to do nutrition programming in the context of COVID-19, the issue was this with the restrictions of movements and everything. One of the biggest challenges was the issue of supplies. So the note was really prepared to outline the actions that you can take in terms of preparedness to avoid blackouts or mitigating situations of shortages. So either preparedness or preparedness to avoid a stock out or mitigation in the event that you already have stock shortage, and as well manage the absence of the nutrition products when the mitigation measures are unsuccessful. As I mentioned earlier, it is only supposed to be adopted only when the relevant consultations have been done with the government, with the nutrition cluster, with the UN agencies. And when we talk about government, we don't just mean at the national level. So it's at national level, at regional level, at world level. So all those discussions must have taken place for all these recommendations to be implemented. Then the government and all stakeholders, including you, the partners, you must agree on the circumstances that will allow for the activation of the temporary measures. And that's why in the beginning I asked, in terms of time, when do you decide to implement the temporary measures? And you said you don't really have a specific time for now. And so it's important that that is actually indicated. And then the other is these changes or these recommendations must be implemented for a given period of time. So they're not supposed to be permanent. They're supposed to be within a specified period, because the whole assumption is that you're not going to continuously have stock out, or there should be measures in place to make sure that you're not having stock out for forever, So these are really more of transitory measures or approaches, so that you can go back to normal programming. And then thirdly, it has to be very clear to all of you as to how you can go back to. So the goal of this was really, the whole idea is to try and minimize program disruption and optimize as much as possible individual children's nutrition status during the periods of disruption. So when we do have supplies challenges, we want to still ensure that we are doing our best to provide the best services and care and resources needed for these children to recover. So there are two aspects that would have to go with. One is preparedness. And the preparedness is, can we try and minimize the risk of SNF breaks before they happen? And can we ensure that we are prepared in the event that the shortages happen? So much of this guidance, we're going to really look at preparedness. And then the second part is going to be looking at mitigation. So the preparedness, as we're saying, we don't want these breaks to happen. So what can we do to make sure they don't happen? Or if they happen, have we prepared ourselves enough to be able to handle the situation? And so how can we do? The first is really to strengthen the supply chain right from the beginning. And so you can make sure you have like your So those are some of the things that could be done. Unfortunately, it appears that there's not much in terms of prepositioning and maintaining a buffer stock that can be done at your level. But ideally, at country level, that should be in place. That hopefully it's a bigger issue than we're looking at, but ideally, there should be ability to have buffer stock, and these buffers can be at country level, at regional level, at world level, or even at facility level. And of course, the other aspect you can do in terms of preparedness is ensuring that you have strong monitoring mechanisms and reporting for breast milk substitutes code violations, because we all know, especially in much of these, contexts or unsafe contexts, there could be issues of donations of these breast milk substitutes or mismanaged, which could, if not well managed, could lead to a lot of issues. And I've mentioned also ensuring that you have updated contingency plans that are tailored to the context. And what would ideally happen in this case would be at least at Wareda level, at regional level, the cluster, I think for Ethiopia, we still have the cluster, not the sector, right?
Yeah, nutrition cluster.
Yes. Yeah. So ideally, we should make sure that as organizations, you have your own contingency plans, or at least your plans feed within the cluster's contingency plans, or at least finding out in the list, finding out if the cluster has a contingency plan and what this contingency plan looks like and what would be the role of each of the parties involved in case, as part of the response. And ideally, this should be reviewed at all times to see, we're trying our level best. And yes, I appreciate that in, where you're currently working and overall in the areas that are affected, it may be a bit difficult, but at least it's best that there's a plan out there that you can look at and say, maybe this is our role as far as plan is concerned. This is how we should coordinate. This is how we should communication in the event of this emergency. The other also the thing you can do, and I think here this is where we can have a lot of work for an organization such as FIDO, is you have to develop a community engagement plan for when you do have the shortages, and also know and have some of the coping strategies that you can put in place. So it's important that you know the approaches that you're going to use as part of your preparedness. So when the stockouts happen, this is what you're going to do. The most important one is ensuring good communication, good and rapid communication of information for any changes that are likely to happen. Most of the times, these organizations will have stockouts, but they will not communicate to the community. And mothers will come and there'll be no supplies today. The next week they'll come and there'll be no supplies, and no communication is given other than, oh, we don't have supplies, just go, come back. So it's important that there's good communication, not only to the mothers, but also to the community leaders, to all the other opinion leaders and stakeholders that directly or indirectly help or support in the mobilization, in the outreach, and also in the care for the children that you have in the program. You should ensure you have the appropriate sensitization messages, messages indicating which supplies you're lacking, why you don't have them, when you expect them, what changes you're going to do, and why you're going to do those changes, and what is the implication. It's important that this information is shared out there. So simply telling the mothers, go, we don't have supplies, is not enough. Other part activities you can look at, increased screening activities when you know that you're going to have supplies breaks, or when those breaks are there, ensure that at least you've planned that in the event we have these issues, we have the capacity or we have available resources to be able to increase our screening activities. You can decide to start doing exhaustive screening activities, implementing of the family mark now that you actually have it as a guidance, which is a good thing. So all those have to be planned for in advance, because if you're going to say, you cannot come and say in the middle of the emergency that you simply want to implement family mark, because it requires resources, it requires planning. So if you have prepared and planned for this, it makes work a little bit easier. The other could be looking at maybe we'll be able to engage in cooking demos, sensitization on cooking methods and approaches and different recipes that we can use locally in the event that we're facing shortages. But the other also is coordination and linking with the various sectors or various clusters to strengthen the prevention of wasting. So as an organization, you don't have to do everything, but you can work with other you don't have to do all the prevention approaches that are there, and then the treatment and all the other. But there's some in terms of wash, in terms of food security, in terms of social protection. You can try and strengthen the linkages between the works that you're doing or your projects, and also the projects of the other organization that are engaged in prevention. Now, mitigation is now we have to apply these measures, But as you imply, we're going to look at all these various measures like product substitution, surveillance, stock sharing, rationing, and other measures. But what is important is that on any of these measures should be applied after you have looked at the pros and cons in relation to the child or the target or end users of the services, which could be the children and the pregnant and lactating women or any other at-risk groups that you select in your community. Stock sharing, and what stock sharing simply means is that you can use local mechanisms where, for example, if in one district they have enough supplies, they could send some of the supplies to another district. Or if one region has more supplies, those could be shared, and it involves a lot of communication and a lot of engagement with the Ministry of Health at all the various levels, and UNICEF and WFP and other parties that you have on ground that provide you with supplies. But that is really what it is. If there's a huge need in Tigray and you have a lot of supplies in Addis, then there could be some discussions to have those supplies, a few of the supplies given to the team in Tigray or Amhara or something like that. Then the other is prevention measures. This is really, yes, you don't have supplies, but then you're also trying to make sure that the children that are not yet severely malnourished or the children that are not yet moderately malnourished don't actually become wasted or malnourished at all. And so you strengthen your prevention approaches in terms of food security and all wasting. So this could be, screening. It could be expanding your criteria for admission. But just make sure that you try to now, you increase the frequency of maybe home visits by the CHWs, I think in your case is the health extension workers. Yes, and the family mark, which I've already mentioned, do the exhaustive screening to make sure that you're trying to prevent, and then also go ahead and ensure proper SBCC, sensitization, IYCF, and all those aspects that can contribute to preventing from the children that are already there that are not malnourished from actually becoming malnourished, because that's going to make it worse. You don't have supplies already. The other mitigation measure is, like we've already mentioned, is the early identification of the children and enrolling them in for treatment. Usually, if you can identify a child much earlier before they really get deteriorated. For example, it's estimated that a child who, for example, you admit a child of MWAC 100 and let's say 112, this child is likely to get out of the program much faster than a child of let's say 100 millimeters of MWAC. So the earlier you enroll these children in the program, the likelihood that they're not going to stay for very long, and therefore they're not going to consume a lot of product. The other, I've seen some places where they do is, for example, if the criteria was that you admit a child in OTP, let's say at 115, that's on the higher side, then you can try and increase and move it to 120. So that means this child who's admitted at 120 will likely get treated much faster, or will have a shorter stay in the program, and indirectly or directly less consumption of products. And this can be done only if you're doing the screening frequently and you're also doing it on a larger scale or exhaustively in the community that you're working with. But it's important that as you try to enroll children early into the program, you factor in the support you need, for example, in case of increased caseload. For example, for OTP, if you say we are now going to be admitting children, up to 120 millimeters, it means you're going to increase the caseload of the number of children you're admitting in the OTP. So you have to factor in, do you have the supplies? If it is for the TSFP program, and now you're going to say, instead of stopping at 124, we are going to go up to, let's say, 130. Then you also factor in, because you're going to increase the number of children that are actually coming in your program. So you need to factor that in. So it's a balance between the potential in reducing the length of stay in the program and the amount of supplies that you're going to consume. Next. The other is to implement complementary measures for the management of wasting during emergencies or during temporary SNF shortage. And some of these measures include, one, you can use locally sourced and safe alternatives for the management of moderate or severe wasting. And this could be local recipes that you can create. And I guess we'll look at the calculator that could help you create a recipe for moderate cases. The other measure that you could put in place is really more to do with promoting dietary diversity to ensure that they are maximizing the energy and nutrient intake for the affected children. So in short, try and promote a healthier and a better diet for these community members, using definitely the supplies that they have. And some of these things could be as simple as, just increasing the food intake by 10% for children who are severely wasted and moderately wasted, and maybe 30% for those who are severely wasted. You could apply the PD Health model if you have the resources to do that, because it would be cheaper than definitely the use of supplies. And in this case, you don't have supplies anyway. But if you have access to the right foods and the right foods to combine, then you could actually create a diet or a meal that would help support this child go back to a better nutrition status. Throughout all this, there has to be promotion and supporting for breastfeeding at all levels, and ensuring proper and responsive feeding and caregiving for all these children. You can do cooking demonstrations. But of course, as you're doing these, you also have to factor in, the resources back at home. Do they have the foods? Do they have the cooking utensils? Do they have the fire, the source of heat? It could be firewood, it could be charcoal. So as you do all this, do not only focus on what you're doing there, but look at it from a holistic way. And I think one of the things I like about the new guideline is it really puts this in perspective. Don't just look at the child at the OTP, but look at their life and how they're going to engage and how it's impacting on their ability to get fully recovered or to even relapse. So as we're thinking of these cooking demonstrations, as we're thinking of this, dietary diversity, we have to look at the social aspect. How is the family? How is the community? And what are the roles, or what are the various aspects in their social life, in their community, in their environment that are affecting this child's nutrition status, and what would be your contribution in terms of supporting in this area. You could also set up mother-to-mother and father support groups if you don't have those in place already. If they exist there, maybe it is just reactivating them and supporting them to continue doing their work. You can look at potential for cash transfer or cash voucher assistance, together with social behavior change communication, and also definitely improving WASH practices and facilities. As you see, when we talk about complementary measures, it's not the nutrition only, but it's more of a multi-sectoral pronged approach to treating and preventing wasting among these children. The other mitigation measure is the product substitution. And I guess this is one of the things you are interested in, and what to do and how to do it. But as you you change or substitute one product for another, it is important to consider whether that item is appropriate for the community you're serving, whether it's acceptable, and also the consistent availability of that product throughout the period where you're having stock disruptions. if it is an item that is going to be cooked, for example, what do we call it? For example, porridge out of CSP, then you need to consider, do the mothers at home have the facilities and utensils? Do they have safe water? Are they going to be able to store this premix item or flour properly to ensure that it doesn't get rancid? Do they actually know how to cook it? Can you do good sensitization for them? Can you also ensure do you have the capacity to provide some of the non-food items that they need, like the utensils, if they don't have them, sources of enough fire, if they don't have them, for the product that you're going to give them to use. And like I've mentioned, ensure that you have enough stock and communicate all the details of this stock or the changes to all the stakeholders. And the stakeholders is not just the caretakers or the mothers, it's the community members, it's the community leaders, it's the security organs, it's both the administrative, social, and political entities that you have within your community. Everyone needs to be aware. Fathers need to be aware, because we don't want a scenario where you're giving people CSB and they're making the porridge and it is being consumed by the fathers, or it is now being sold and stolen and sold in the market in exchange for other things. So all communication is very important. It is also important that when you do change a product, you put in place or you strengthen your monitoring mechanisms, because you have to make sure you're recording all the information, you're checking to see that this child is actually improving as they should be improving, or if they're not improving, then you mentioning and indicating all this information, any diseases they are getting and mortality, because you want to know, is the product you substituted being used appropriately? That's number one. Is it doing the right job that's supposed to do? That's number two. Is it actually affecting this child or this target beneficiary? And then, of course, it's important that every time you're going through this phase, you're reporting and documenting the lessons you are learning throughout the process. So when we talk about product substitutions, these are some of the ideas, and I'm going to talk about this the way it is, but I also want to emphasize that now there have been some changes with the new guidance. But we're saying in the event that you don't have RUTF, the first recommendation would be to use BP 100. If you don't have BP 100, then you can go on and use RUSF, but again, there has been some contention with this. There has been communication on this, that RUSF is not supposed to be used for the treatment of severe acute malnutrition. And then if this also fails, then eventually you can go on and use a moderate quantity lipid-based nutrient supplements. And I'll show you some of the examples. So for RUSF, if you don't have RUSF, you can use super cereal, which is really a fortified blended food. And I'll explain a little bit later. And then you can see RUSF and fortified blended foods can be used interchangeably for the treatment of moderate acute malnutrition. But in the event that you don't have RUSF and you don't have super cereal, or you don't have the fortified blended foods, then you can go on and use RUTF or the medium quantity lipid nutrient supplements. Now, I need to make a clarification of this in relation to the updated guideline for WHO. Now, the updated guideline communicates that you can use RUTF to treat high-risk MAM cases. So what they've done in the new guideline, you have the SAM cases, and then the MAM cases have been categorized into two cases. So we have the high-risk MAM cases, which is 115 millimeters to 119 millimeters. Cecile, you can correct, but I think I remember that clearly. And then anyone who is 120 millimeters is is not considered is a non-high risk MAM case. So what it is that for these high risk cases, if you don't have RIUSF, these MAM high risk cases, you can treat them with RIUTF. Or you can treat them in the normal way, which is RIUSF. If you don't have RIUSF, you can use improved fortified blended foods. That is the super cereal where you have added oil and I think milk. Or if that is not available, then you can use the normal fortified blended food, which is just the normal CSB without milk or oil. So that's what the guidelines now recommend. But for the MAM cases that are non-risk, that is MAM cases that are 120 millimeters and above, the priority should be using locally generated recipes for their treatment. I hope I've clarified on that. Next. And so these are some of the examples. I'm sure you've seen most of these, but remember that they can actually change in terms of packaging depending on the the manufacturer or the producer or the main distributor of the item. But these are some of the common, and most of them really have maintained this same packaging for a long, long time. I don't think most have changed. But most of our RUTF is red and that color. The RUSF is a yellow color or something like that. The blended foods come in those packages. Some of them, like the normal CSB, you mix it yourself and you give people packages. And the BP5 and the BP100, those are really how they look like. But again, the packaging can change. So it's not necessarily that the way you've presented it here is how it's going to be looking like. And you can get all this information in the MAM decision tool. I think we already shared that some time back at the beginning of our discussions earlier, but we can still reshare the link for you if you're still interested. Next. So we've seen a couple of mitigation measures, which is, product substitution, complementary measures. Another measure that you can do is you can revise your target and also the design of your program. This information is clearly explained in the MAM decision tool. And so when you for you to revise your target and your program design is, you have to decide, first of all, do you actually want to change your program design or not? And you're going to do this based on the GAM prevalence and the SAM risk score. So the SAM risk score, there is a table which you're going to look at. You look at the prevalence, you look at food insecurity, and then you give a score, from 1 to 3, and then you add those scores, those values together, and you're given a score range, and we look at that. So what you're going to do is, once for you to make a decision, you'll have to determine your program objectives. Do you actually want to stick to a prevention and treatment program? Do you want to do only program activities? Do you want to do only treatment activities, or you want to do nothing? And then you also have to look at the modality of the work that you're going to do. Is it supposed to be supplementary? Is it supposed to be cash assistance or voucher? Is it IYCF? And then who is your target? What items are you going to use? So this clearly explains it, the process that you're supposed to follow. And then and you already do this, I'm sure, like which programs do you want in place? How are we going to do them? If it's a treatment program, are you going to give products? Are you going to do in a cash program? Are you going to do infant and young child feeding? And then who is your target? Is it children under 5? Is it PLWs? And even when it comes to children under 5, are you going to look at high risk children under 5, which could be between the age of 0 to 23, which could be tweens, which could be children who are 0 to 59, but come from maybe female-headed homes or child-headed homes. So all those are aspects that you have to put in place based on the context. And then you review and revise regularly over time, whether you keep on changing the program or something or not. Next. And so when if you clearly look at this table, once you look at the GAM level, if it is high, but the risk level, and like I said, with the risk level, what you look at morbidity, food security, population movement, and population density, and you give it a score, 1 to 3, and you add the scores. So if you have high GAM levels and you have high risk level, the recommendation would be for you to do both prevention and treatment. As long as your GAM levels are high, irrespective of the risk level, whether it is high, medium, or low, we would recommend that you do both prevention and treatment. If you have the GAM levels are medium, but the risk level is high or medium, then we'll still recommend that you do both prevention and treatment. But if you have medium GAM level and the risk level you calculated is also low, then you probably will do mainly treatment, focusing on treatment and aspects of prevention. If they are low, then if the GAM levels are low and the risk level is high or medium, then you're going to do prevention. But if they are very low, if the GAM levels are low and the risk level is low, then you simply monitor the situation. As you do all these, you have to ensure that you're linking to other programs, you're doing IYCF, and then supporting and ensuring overall food safety and food security within your context. Thanks. So like we said, for you to determine the program modality, it should be based on the markets. If you're going to do cash voucher, you cannot do cash voucher if you don't have proper market systems or any cash assistance anyway. If you don't have a good market in place, you also have to factor in household incomes and availability of the foods that you actually want to look for. So if, for example, if you want to choose cash voucher, like I've said, the market systems must be in place, the income levels must be to a certain level, because that will determine the size of the cash assistance you're going to do. If you're going to do, for example, blanket supplementary feeding program, you also have to factor in distance, gender aspects, safety and security of the items that you're going to provide. Again, you have to consider the resources that they have at home to maybe cook the item that you're going to give them. And then you have to ensure that you have a strong SBCC and IYCF or IYCFE support in place. And then, like we mentioned, we've already looked at that, who is the target group, which food items are you going to use, and how long are you going to implement these activities, and how do you want to deliver these products or these items. Next. And then finally, I think one of the others that we talked about is the implementation of these temporary adaptations. In some contexts, they have also been called the simplified approaches. And like I said, based on the new guidance, some of these are now no longer simplifications or adaptations, because they're now part of programming as per the WHO guidance. But I'm sure you've had some of these, which is using RUTF to treat both SAM and MAM, or severe and moderate wasting, without complications. We need to emphasize that any cases with complications must be referred to inpatient care. We've already talked about expanding the admission criteria in the OTP to less than 125. So basically what you're referring to as MAM cases also being treated in the OTP or in one program, or using only MOAC, discharging criteria being all the children admitted once they exceed 125, you discharge them as long as they don't have edema. And then modification in the dosage of the RUTF that you're giving. For example, instead of giving RUTF based on weight, which is what your national guidelines indicate, you can give a modified value, which is 2 RUTF sachets per child per day for those who are severely wasted. And then 1 sachet of RUTF. We'll have to change that. We'll make a correction in the slide. RUTF per day for 1 RUTF sachet per day for children who are moderately wasted. And like we've said, where we don't have OTP or SFP, treating all the children with RUTF, or you can use RESF if you're basing on the MAM decision tool. Next. And these are, I'll not go so much into the detail, but it's just giving examples of how you can go about treating children who are moderately malnourished and those who are severely malnourished when you don't have an OTP, when you have an OTP but you don't have an SFP. So I will not have to go into details, but it's still part of the adaptations that you can put in place. All the children have to be seen in the OTP. Then, if supplies are limited, then you're going to give RUTF 7 sachet per child for a week. If you have supplies, then you're going to do 14, which is 2 per day. I'll not go into details. You'll probably read this for yourselves when you get time, because we need to move on to the calculator. Next.